What happens when the most advanced species in the galaxy discovers that their understanding of civilization has been fundamentally wrong? When a curious alien scholar ventures to Earth expecting to find primitive rituals, she instead uncovers something that will shake the very foundations of galactic society. This is the story of how humanity's most ordinary traditions became the catalyst for an extraordinary revolution across the stars. Sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from studying the most complex civilizations, but from observing the simplest moments of those we thought we understood. Zaraka stepped off the transport vessel onto the dusty surface of Earth, her four eyes blinking in sequence as they adjusted to the planet's singular sun. The research facility she had left behind on Kepler Prime seemed impossibly advanced compared to this primitive world, yet something had drawn her here against all logical reasoning. Her supervisors at the Galactic Research Institute had called her request foolish. Why would anyone want to study the barbaric customs of humanity when there were 12 other species with far more sophisticated cultures available for academic pursuit? The young Keplerian scientist adjusted her translation device and checked her bioscanner readings. The atmospheric composition was tolerable, though the oxygen levels were higher than she preferred. Her pale blue skin would need protection from the harsh solar radiation, but her adaptive clothing had already begun the necessary adjustments. Standing barely 4 feet tall with elongated limbs and oversized cranium, she knew she would attract attention among the humans, but her research required direct observation. Zaraka had spent 3 cycles studying humanity from orbital stations, watching their settlements through long-range sensors, analyzing their primitive communication networks. What she had discovered puzzled her scientific mind. Unlike other species that had developed complex philosophical frameworks before achieving space travel, humans seemed to operate on pure instinct and emotional responses. Their technology advanced in chaotic spurts rather than logical progression. Most disturbing of all, they appeared to waste enormous amounts of time on activities that served no apparent survival function. The settlement she had chosen for her field study was called Portland, located in what humans designated as Oregon. According to her research, it was representative of human urban development without being so large as to overwhelm her initial observations. The transport had deposited her in a wooded area several kilometers from the city center, giving her time to practice moving in Earth's gravitational field before encountering the subjects of her study. Her first steps on solid ground felt strange after months of shipboard artificial gravity. Earth's pull was stronger than Kepler Prime, but not uncomfortably so. The forest around her teemed with lifeforms that seemed chaotic and uncontrolled compared to the carefully managed ecosystems of her home world. Plants grew in random patterns, competing for resources without apparent organization. Small creatures moved through the undergrowth following no discernible logic. It was all very unscientific, yet undeniably vibrant. As she walked toward the settlement, Zaraka reviewed her research objectives. The Galactic Council's anthropological studies had identified several human behaviors that defied explanation. Humans gathered regularly in large groups for no productive purpose, engaging in synchronized movements and vocalizations. They consumed prepared foods together even when nutrition could be obtained more efficiently through individual feeding. Most bizarrely, they exchanged material objects without any apparent economic benefit, often wrapped in decorative coverings that were immediately discarded. These behaviors had been classified as primitive ritual activities by previous researchers who had observed humanity from a distance. The current academic consensus suggested that humans were trapped in an early stage of cultural development, unable to progress beyond instinctual group behaviors that had once served survival functions but now existed as meaningless tradition. Zaraka's dissertation advisor had suggested she could easily write a paper confirming these theories with minimal fieldwork. But something about the orbital observations had troubled her. The energy readings from human settlements showed patterns that didn't match the expected signatures of a primitive society. Their power consumption spiked at irregular intervals that couldn't be explained by industrial activity or basic life support needs. More curious still, these spikes often coincided with the mysterious gathering behaviors. If the activities were truly meaningless, why did they require such significant resource allocation? The edge of the human settlement came into view as she crested a small hill. Buildings spread out before her in an organic pattern that seemed random yet somehow functional. Unlike Keplerian cities with their geometric precision and optimal spacing calculations, human architecture appeared to have evolved without central planning. Structures of different heights and designs stood next to each other without apparent logic, yet the overall effect was not unpleasant to observe. Her bioscanner detected thousands of life signs moving through the settlement in patterns that seemed chaotic at first glance. But, as she watched longer, subtle structures emerged. Certain pathways carried heavier traffic at specific time intervals. Groups of humans moved together with shared destinations. There was underlying organization beneath the apparent randomness, though she couldn't yet decipher its principles. Zaraka activated her camouflage field, a light-bending technology that would make her appear as a somewhat unusual but not impossible human to casual observers. Her four eyes were reduced to two, her skin tone shifted to a pale variant within human normal range, and her height increased slightly through gravitational manipulation. The disguise wouldn't withstand close scrutiny, but it would allow her to move through the settlement without causing immediate alarm. She chose a major pathway and began walking toward what appeared to be a concentration of activity in the settlement's center. The humans she passed showed the expected variety of sizes, colorations, and clothing styles that her research had documented. What surprised her was their behavior toward each other. Rather than the aggressive territorial responses she had expected from their military history, most humans ignored each other completely. Those who did interact showed brief but complex social exchanges involving facial expressions, vocal tones, and gesture patterns that seemed to convey far more information than the simple words being spoken. A human female approached from the opposite direction, and Zaraka decided to attempt her first direct contact. According to her cultural files, humans responded to certain vocal patterns when approached by strangers. She had practiced the appropriate sounds, though she wasn't certain about their exact meaning. "Excuse me," she said, matching the phonetic patterns from her database. The human female stopped and looked at her with what appeared to be a neutral expression. "I am visiting your settlement and wish to observe your cultural activities. Could you direct me to where such activities might be occurring?" The human's expression shifted through several configurations that Zaraka's scanner couldn't interpret. Finally, the female spoke. "Are you looking for something specific? Like a museum or cultural center?" The words were within Zaraka's vocabulary range, but their context confused her. "I wish to observe ritual behaviors." The gathering activities where humans engage in synchronized movements and exchange decorative objects. "Oh," the human said, and her expression shifted again. "You mean like festivals or celebrations? There's actually a block party happening this weekend just a few streets over. Is that the kind of thing you're looking for?" Block party. The term wasn't in her database, but the context suggested it was one of the gathering behaviors she had come to study. "Yes, I believe that would be appropriate for my research. Could you provide directions?" The human female gave her a series of navigation instructions that seemed unnecessarily complex, involving landmark references and relative distances rather than precise coordinates. But she managed to encode the information into her mental mapping system. As she prepared to continue on her path, the human spoke again. "Are you doing some kind of anthropology project? You sound like you're from somewhere pretty far away." The question contained implications that made Zaraka uncomfortable. Her disguise was apparently less effective than she had hoped. "I am conducting academic research on social behaviors," she said carefully. "That's cool," the human replied, using a word that seemed to indicate approval despite its temperature-related meaning. "I'm Sarah, by the way. If you need help finding your way around, I live in this neighborhood." The offer of assistance from a stranger contradicted several theories about human territorial behavior. Zaraka filed the observation for later analysis. "I appreciate your offer, Sarah. I am called." She paused, realizing she needed a human-compatible name. "Zara. Nice to meet you, Zara. Hope you find what you're looking for." As Sarah continued on her way, Zaraka stood in the middle of the pathway processing what had just occurred. The interaction had been far more complex than her training had prepared her for. The human had offered assistance to someone she perceived as an outsider without any apparent expectation of reciprocal benefit. The vocal tones had been friendly and welcoming rather than cautious or aggressive. Most puzzling of all, the human had seemed genuinely interested in helping her succeed in her research objectives. She followed Sarah's directions through the winding pathways of the settlement, noting the increasing density of humans as she approached the area where the block party was supposedly taking place. The bioscanner readings showed elevated energy signatures ahead, confirming that some kind of unusual activity was indeed occurring. As she rounded a corner onto a street that had been closed to vehicular traffic, Zaraka encountered her first direct observation of human ritual behavior. Hundreds of humans had gathered in an open area between buildings. Tables had been arranged in seemingly random patterns, laden with prepared foods of every description. Small humans ran between the adults in what appeared to be play behavior, while larger humans stood in groups engaged in animated conversations. Most remarkable was the music. Sound reproduction equipment had been arranged to fill the entire space with rhythmic audio patterns that seemed to trigger involuntary movement responses in many of the humans. Some swayed slightly in place, others moved their feet in time with the beats, and a few had begun what could only be described as ritualized dance movements. The energy readings on her bioscanner were unlike anything she had ever recorded. But it wasn't just the electrical power consumption from the sound equipment. The humans themselves were generating measurable energy fields through their synchronized movements and shared emotional states. The readings suggested some kind of group consciousness effect that her scientific training said should be impossible. Zaraka moved closer to the gathering, adjusting her scanner settings to record everything she could observe. A human male approached her from one of the food tables, carrying a small plate laden with various prepared items. "You look like you're new to the neighborhood," he said with the same welcoming vocal tone she had heard from Sarah. "I'm Mike. Welcome to our annual block party." The offering of food to a stranger was another behavior that contradicted her theoretical framework. Among Keplerian society, food sharing indicated either family bonds or formal alliance agreements. But this human was presenting sustenance to her without any prior relationship or negotiation. "I am Zara," she replied, accepting the plate because refusing might be interpreted as aggressive behavior. "I am here to observe your ritual activities." Mike's expression shifted in the same complex way Sarah's had earlier. "Well, you picked a good day for it. We've got the Williams family doing their famous barbecue, the kids have set up a whole obstacle course in the park, and later tonight we're doing the annual talent show where everyone gets to show off their hidden skills." Hidden skills. Another term that didn't match her research data. If the skills were hidden, how could they be displayed for observation? And why would humans conceal abilities that could be beneficial to community survival? "Could you explain the purpose of these activities?" she asked, pulling out her recording device. "What survival function do they serve for your social group?" Mike stared at her for several seconds, his expression cycling through configurations her scanner couldn't interpret. Finally, he laughed, producing a vocalization that registered as genuine amusement rather than mockery. "Survival function? I guess we do it because it makes us happy? Because we like spending time with our neighbors and getting to know each other better. Because it's fun to see what everyone's been up to and catch up on news. Because the kids love having space to run around together. Because Mrs. Chen makes these amazing spring rolls that she only brings out for special occasions." None of his explanations made sense from a resource allocation perspective. The humans were expending significant time and energy on activities that produced no measurable benefit beyond emotional satisfaction. Yet the energy readings suggested that whatever they were doing was generating effects that her instruments could barely quantify. "Fun," she repeated, testing the word. Her translation matrix offered several possible meanings, but none of them seemed adequate to explain the complex phenomenon she was observing. "Yeah, fun," Mike said, his expression remaining positive. "You know, enjoyment, pleasure, having a good time. Don't they have fun where you come from?" The question struck at the heart of what was confusing her about human behavior. Keplerian society was organized around efficiency and logical progression toward predetermined goals. Individual satisfaction was considered a byproduct of successful achievement, not a goal in itself. The concept of engaging in activities purely for emotional enjoyment was not just foreign, it was theoretically wasteful. "We focus on productive activities," she said carefully. "Behaviors that advance our civilization's development objectives." Mike nodded slowly, but his expression had shifted again. "That sounds intense." But, hey, you're here now, right? Maybe you could try some of our unproductive activities and see how they work for you. No pressure, but the invitation's open. As if to demonstrate his point, a group of small humans ran past them, chasing a spherical object while vocalizing in high volume. Their energy readings showed the same elevated patterns she had observed in the adults, but even more pronounced. Whatever was happening here wasn't just tolerated by human society, it was actively encouraged from an early age. Zaraka realized that her academic preparation had been fundamentally inadequate. The behaviors she was observing weren't primitive rituals clinging to relevance in a developing society. They were sophisticated social technologies that produced measurable effects on both individual and group functioning. Effects that her own advanced civilization seemed to have overlooked entirely in their pursuit of logical efficiency. The implications were staggering. If humans had developed social technologies that enhanced group cohesion and individual satisfaction simultaneously, their apparent primitiveness might be masking innovations that could revolutionize galactic civilization. The question was whether she could decode the principles underlying their success before her research period ended. Mike was still standing beside her, apparently waiting for some kind of response. She looked at the plate of food in her hands, then, at the hundreds of humans around her engaged in activities that defied rational explanation yet produced results that her instruments could measure but not understand. Perhaps, she said slowly, you could teach me about these activities. I would like to understand how they function. Now you're talking, Mike said, his expression brightening considerably. Come on, let's start with the food. That's always the best introduction to human culture. As he led her toward the tables laden with prepared dishes, Zaraka realized that her research project had just transformed from academic observation into active participation. The implications for her career were unclear, but the potential for discovery was greater than anything she had imagined when she first requested permission to visit this supposedly primitive world. The food table stretched longer than Zaraka had initially calculated, laden with preparations that defied every principle of efficient nutrition she had studied. Humans had taken basic sustenance requirements and transformed them into elaborate presentations that served no apparent survival function. Yet the energy readings around the table showed some of the highest positive emissions she had recorded since arriving on Earth. Mike guided her along the display, explaining each dish with an enthusiasm that seemed disproportionate to their nutritional value. These are Janet's famous potato salad. The secret ingredient is supposed to be love, but I think it's actually mayonnaise and pickle juice. Over here we've got Tom's smoked ribs. He's been working on that sauce recipe for 15 years. And this beautiful fruit arrangement is from the Nakamura family. They grow everything in their backyard garden. Each explanation contained references to individual humans and their personal investment in the food preparation. Rather than optimal nutrient distribution calculated by central planning algorithms, this was a system where each participant contributed according to their own interests and capabilities. The inefficiency should have created shortages and conflicts, yet the variety and abundance exceeded anything Zaraka had observed in Keplerian communal feeding facilities. The secret ingredient is love, she asked, focusing on the most incomprehensible element of Mike's explanation. It's just an expression, Mike said, laughing again. Means she puts extra care and attention into making it special. When you cook something for people you care about, you tend to make it better than you would for yourself. The concept violated fundamental principles of resource allocation that governed civilized society. Individuals were supposed to optimize their efforts for maximum collective benefit, not expend additional resources based on emotional attachments to specific recipients. Yet the human standing next to her was describing this economically irrational behavior as if it were natural and beneficial. Mike handed her a plate and began selecting items from various dishes, explaining the origin and preparation method of each one. Try a little bit of everything, he suggested. That's how you figure out what you like. Personal preference in nutrition was another concept that puzzled Zaraka. Keplerian food was formulated to provide optimal nutritional balance with acceptable taste variation to prevent monotony. The idea of choosing sustenance based on individual enjoyment rather than physiological requirements seemed primitive, yet the humans around her displayed obvious pleasure in their consumption choices. She sampled the potato salad Mike had recommended, expecting basic nutritional adequacy. Instead, her taste receptors registered a complex combination of flavors that seemed designed purely for sensory pleasure. The preparation had no obvious nutritional advantages over simpler alternatives, yet consuming it triggered positive emotional responses that her bioscanner detected as measurable improvements in her stress indicators. Good, right? Mike asked, observing her reaction. It is pleasant, she admitted, struggling to categorize the experience. But why invest additional resources in achieving pleasure when the same nutritional goals could be accomplished more efficiently? Mike paused with his own fork halfway to his mouth, studying her expression with the same intensity she had been applying to her research subjects. You really are from somewhere very different, aren't you? Where you come from, do people only eat for nutrition? The directness of his question suggested her disguise was less effective than she hoped. But his tone remained curious rather than suspicious, as if unusual origins were interesting rather than threatening. We optimize resource allocation for maximum collective benefit, she said, maintaining her cover story while providing accurate information. That sounds lonely, Mike said quietly. One of the best parts of eating together is sharing the experience. Talking about flavors, comparing preferences, discovering new combinations. It's not just about the food, it's about the connection. Connection. Another concept that appeared frequently in human social interactions but had no equivalent in her academic training. Keplerian society valued coordination and cooperation, but these were logical arrangements designed to achieve specific objectives. The human version seemed to involve emotional bonds that served no apparent practical purpose yet somehow enhanced group functioning. As if to demonstrate his point, an elderly human female approached their location carrying a large covered dish. Mike, dear, could you help me set this up? My arms aren't what they used to be. Of course, Mrs. Rodriguez, Mike replied immediately, setting down his plate to assist her. What did you bring this year? My grandmother's tamales recipe, she said with obvious pride. I've been making them since dawn to get them ready for today. Mike's expression brightened considerably as he helped her arrange the dish on the table. Mrs. Rodriguez makes the best tamales in the entire city, he told Zaraka. Her grandmother brought the recipe from Mexico over 60 years ago. The elderly female looked pleased by his praise, then turned her attention to Zaraka. I don't think we've met, dear. Are you new to the neighborhood? I am visiting to study your cultural activities, Zaraka replied, deciding that honesty might be more effective than deception with these remarkably welcoming humans. How wonderful, Mrs. Rodriguez said, her expression indicating genuine pleasure rather than the suspicion Zaraka had expected. What would you like to know? I've lived on this street for 43 years, watched it grow and change with all the families who've called it home. The offer of information from someone with extensive local knowledge represented a significant research opportunity. Could you explain the purpose of this gathering? What objectives does it accomplish for your community? Mrs. Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Mike that seemed to communicate volumes of information through minor facial expressions. Well, let's see. It brings neighbors together who might not otherwise have reason to talk. We learn about each other's lives, share our troubles and celebrations. The children get to play together in a safe environment. We exchange recipes and recommendations. Sometimes we discover that someone needs help with something and we can organize assistance. But what is the primary objective? Zaraka pressed. What specific problem does this gathering solve? The problem of being strangers to the people we live near, Mrs. Rodriguez said simply. Life is better when you know your community. The answer was simultaneously profound and inadequate. From a systems analysis perspective, informal social connections could provide redundancy and support networks that enhanced group survival. But the energy investment seemed disproportionate to those practical benefits. There had to be additional functions that she wasn't recognizing. Would you like to try a tamale? Mrs. Rodriguez asked, opening her dish to reveal carefully wrapped preparations that had clearly required hours of individual labor. They're a traditional food from my family's culture. Zaraka accepted the offered item and bit into it carefully. The explosion of flavors was even more complex than the potato salad, involving multiple ingredients combined in ways that seemed designed purely for sensory impact. But, beyond the taste, Consuming something that represented this human's cultural heritage while she watched with obvious pleasure created an emotional resonance that her instruments registered as significant. "It's remarkable," Zaraka said honestly. "The preparation must require considerable time investment." "Oh, it does," Mrs. Rodriguez agreed cheerfully. "But that's part of what makes them special. When you put time and care into something, it becomes more than just food. It becomes a way of sharing love." There was that word again. Love. Her translation matrix offered multiple definitions, but none that adequately explained its function in human social systems. The emotion seemed to motivate resource expenditure that violated economic logic, yet somehow produced benefits that exceeded the costs. A commotion near the center of the gathering drew their attention. A group of small humans had organized some kind of competitive activity involving the spherical object she had observed earlier. Adult humans had gathered around them, vocalizing encouragement and praise for their efforts. The energy readings showed spikes corresponding to moments of particular intensity in the competition. "The kids started a soccer game," Mike explained. "Want to go watch?" They moved closer to the activity, and Zaraka observed the complex dynamics of human competitive behavior. The small humans were divided into two groups, attempting to move the spherical object toward opposite ends of a defined space using only their feet and heads. The rules seemed arbitrary and inefficient for achieving any practical objective, yet all participants displayed intense focus and emotional investment. What fascinated her most was the behavior of the adult humans observing the activity. They cheered for good performances regardless of which team produced them, offered encouragement to participants who made mistakes, and provided instruction and guidance without being asked. Rather than the zero-sum competitive dynamics she expected, this seemed to be a system where everyone's success was celebrated simultaneously. "Why do the adults invest energy in the children's inefficient activity?" she asked Mike. "Because watching kids have fun makes us happy," he replied as if the answer were obvious. "Plus they're learning important skills like teamwork, coordination, and how to handle winning and losing gracefully. Skills that couldn't be taught through direct instruction but had to be experienced through practical application." Zaraka was beginning to recognize that human learning systems were far more sophisticated than their apparent primitiveness suggested. Rather than downloading information directly into developing minds, they created experiential frameworks that allowed individuals to discover principles through guided exploration. One of the small humans kicked the spherical object in an uncontrolled manner, sending it directly toward Zaraka's location. Acting on instinct, she intercepted it and attempted to return it to the playing area. Her calculation was slightly off due to unfamiliarity with Earth's gravitational field, but the sphere traveled roughly toward its intended destination. "Nice kick," called one of the adult humans. "Want to join the game?" The invitation was clearly directed at her, despite her obvious status as an outsider who had contributed nothing to their community. Before she could formulate a response, several of the small humans had surrounded her, expressing enthusiasm for her participation through rapid vocalizations and energetic gestures. "I do not know the rules," she protested weakly. "We'll teach you," said a small female human with elaborate hair arrangements and grass stains on her clothing. "It's easy. Just try to get the ball to that goal over there, and don't use your hands." The simplicity of the rules contrasted sharply with their arbitrary nature, yet the activity clearly served multiple functions beyond its apparent objective. Zaraka found herself drawn into the playing area, surrounded by humans of various sizes who seemed determined to include her in their cooperative competition. For the next period of time, which her instruments measured as approximately 37 minutes but which seemed to pass at an impossible rate, Zaraka engaged in the most inefficient activity of her scientific career. She chased the spherical object around a designated space, attempting to coordinate her movements with temporary teammates while competing against temporary opponents. She made numerous errors, achieved occasional successes, and experienced emotional fluctuations that had no logical relationship to the practical significance of the outcomes. Yet her bioscanner readings showed remarkable changes in her physiological state. Stress indicators dropped to levels she hadn't experienced since her childhood. Energy production increased despite the physical exertion. Most significantly, her brain showed activation patterns in regions that had been dormant since she began her academic career. When the activity concluded, she found herself surrounded by humans expressing appreciation for her participation. Small humans hugged her legs while adult humans patted her shoulders and offered congratulations on particularly good plays. The physical contact should have been uncomfortable given her species' preference for personal space, yet somehow it felt reassuring and pleasant. "You're a natural," said the small female who had initially invited her to participate. "Will you play with us next time?" Next time. The assumption that she would return for future gatherings, that she was now part of their community network, that her temporary participation had created ongoing social bonds. The efficiency of human social integration was remarkable. "I would enjoy that," Zaraka replied, surprising herself with the honesty of the statement. As the formal game ended, the humans began transitioning to other activities. Some gathered around musical instruments that had appeared from various locations, beginning to produce coordinated audio patterns that seemed to emerge spontaneously from their collective interactions. Others organized impromptu competitions involving various physical challenges. Still others simply sat in conversation groups, exchanging information and experiences with no apparent agenda beyond mutual entertainment. Mike reappeared at her side, carrying 2 containers of a cold liquid that produced pleasant sensations when consumed. "How was your first soccer experience?" "Highly inefficient," she replied automatically, then paused to consider the statement's accuracy. "But, also, beneficial in ways I cannot yet quantify." "That's a pretty good description of most human activities," Mike said with apparent satisfaction. "We specialize in doing things that don't make sense but somehow make life better." The paradox at the heart of human civilization was becoming clearer to her. They had developed social technologies that produced measurable benefits through mechanisms that violated logical analysis. Their apparent inefficiency masked sophisticated systems for generating individual satisfaction and group cohesion simultaneously. As the afternoon progressed into evening, the character of the gathering shifted again. The humans began to organize what Mike called the talent show, where individuals would demonstrate personal skills and abilities for community appreciation. Zaraka observed humans displaying capabilities that ranged from practical crafts to purely artistic expressions, each performance receiving enthusiastic approval regardless of its objective quality or utility. "Would you like to share something?" asked an adult human who seemed to be coordinating the activity. "We'd love to learn about your background." The invitation presented both an opportunity and a challenge. Sharing her actual background would reveal her extraterrestrial origins and potentially compromise her research. But refusing to participate might limit her acceptance within the community structure she was trying to understand. "I study energy patterns," she said carefully. "Perhaps I could demonstrate some of my observations." She activated her bioscanner and projected its readings onto a portable display, showing the energy signatures she had recorded throughout the day. The humans gathered around her device with fascination, watching the real-time data streams that revealed the invisible patterns underlying their social interactions. "This is incredible," breathed one of the adult humans. "Are you saying we're actually generating measurable energy when we interact with each other?" "The readings suggest that human social activities produce effects that extend beyond individual consciousness," Zaraka explained, warming to her subject. "Your gathering behaviors create collective field phenomena that enhance both group cohesion and individual well-being." The humans examined her data with intelligent curiosity, asking sophisticated questions about measurement techniques and theoretical implications. Their understanding of scientific principles was far more advanced than her briefings had suggested. These weren't primitive beings trapped in meaningless rituals, they were sophisticated practitioners of social technologies they had developed through experiential rather than theoretical methods. "So when we say community makes us feel connected," said Mrs. Rodriguez thoughtfully, "there's actually a scientific basis for that feeling?" "Your intuitive understanding appears to be accurate," Zaraka confirmed. "Though the mechanisms involved are more complex than current galactic science recognizes." The admission hung in the air as she realized its implications. She had just acknowledged that human social technology exceeded the understanding of advanced galactic civilization. The primitive species she had come to study had developed innovations that her own sophisticated society couldn't even measure properly. As the evening continued and the humans began their journey toward the conclusion of their gathering, Zaraka realized that her research project had fundamentally changed direction. Rather than confirming existing theories about primitive human behavior, she was documenting evidence of advanced social technologies that could revolutionize understanding of civilization itself. The question now was whether she could learn enough about these technologies to bring meaningful innovations back to her own society, or whether the gap between Keplerian logic and human intuition was too vast to bridge. The answer would determine not only the success of her research, but, potentially, the future development of galactic civilization itself. 3 days after the block party, Zaraka found herself returning to the human settlement with questions that multiplied faster than she could find answers. Her initial report to the Galactic Research Institute had been deliberately vague, focusing on energy measurements rather than the disturbing implications of her observations. Her supervisors expected confirmation of existing theories about primitive human behavior, not evidence that those theories were fundamentally wrong. Sarah had invited her to observe what humans called a family dinner, promising it would provide insights into their small group social dynamics. Zaraka approached the designated dwelling with her recording equipment carefully concealed and her expectations thoroughly disrupted by everything she had witnessed so far. The structure Sarah inhabited was smaller than optimal for efficient living space utilization, yet somehow it felt more welcoming than the precisely designed quarters Zaraka occupied in her research facility. Plants grew in containers throughout the space without apparent function beyond aesthetic pleasure. Furniture was arranged for comfort rather than utility. The walls displayed images that served no information storage purpose but seemed to evoke positive emotional responses. "Thanks for coming," Sarah said as she opened the door. "I hope you're hungry because my mom always cooks enough food for an army." Inside, Zaraka was introduced to what humans called a nuclear family unit consisting of Sarah, her parents David and Linda, and her younger sibling Marcus. The energy readings in the dwelling were unlike anything she had recorded in public spaces. Rather than the elevated excitement of the community gathering, this was a steady, warm field that seemed to emanate from the emotional bonds between individuals. "So you're the researcher Sarah told us about," said Linda, offering her a seat at their food preparation area. "What kind of culture are you studying us for?" The question was more perceptive than Zaraka had anticipated. "I am investigating social bonding mechanisms and their effects on group functioning," she replied carefully. "Fancy way of saying you want to know why people care about each other," David observed with a smile that indicated amusement rather than mockery. "That's a pretty fundamental question." Marcus, who appeared to be in the developmental stage humans called adolescence, looked up from a handheld device that seemed to monopolize his attention. "Are you writing a paper about us? Because that's kind of cool." The casual acceptance of being studied by an outsider continued to puzzle Zaraka. Most species guarded their social structures from foreign observation, yet humans seemed genuinely interested in helping her understand their culture. Either they were remarkably secure in their social systems, or they failed to recognize potential threats to their community stability. "I am trying to understand how your social activities produce the effects I have measured," she said. "Your energy output patterns suggest mechanisms that my academic training did not prepare me to recognize." "Show us," Sarah said with immediate interest. "I'd love to see what we look like from a scientific perspective." Zaraka activated her bioscanner and projected its readings into the space above their table. The family members leaned forward to examine the data streams that revealed the invisible connections between them. Unlike the chaotic energy patterns of the larger community gathering, this display showed stable resonance fields that pulsed in harmony between individuals. "That's beautiful," Linda said softly. "We're actually connected to each other in ways we can measure?" The readings suggest that prolonged emotional bonding creates persistent field effects that enhance individual stability and group coordination, Zaraka explained. "But the mechanisms involved are more sophisticated than any social technology my civilization has developed." David studied the display with obvious intelligence. "So when we say we feel close to someone, there's actual scientific basis for that sensation?" "Your intuitive language appears to describe measurable phenomena with remarkable accuracy," Zaraka confirmed. "Though I do not yet understand how you developed these capabilities without formal scientific analysis." "Maybe because we experience them directly rather than studying them from outside," Marcus suggested, surprising everyone with his insight. "Like, you don't need to understand physics to know that jumping off a roof will hurt." The observation was more profound than the young human probably realized. Zaraka's species had developed their social structures through careful analysis and logical optimization. Humans seem to have evolved their social technologies through experiential learning and emotional feedback. The result was systems that worked more effectively than theoretically designed alternatives. "Could you explain how your family unit functions?" she asked. "What are the operational principles that maintain stability and coordination?" The family members exchanged glances that seemed to communicate complex information through subtle expressions. Finally, Linda spoke. "I don't think we operate on principles exactly. We just care about each other and try to make decisions that are good for everyone." "But how do you resolve conflicts when individual objectives don't align with group needs?" Zaraka pressed. "What algorithms determine resource allocation and responsibility distribution?" "Algorithms?" David repeated, looking puzzled. "We talk things out. We compromise. We take turns making sacrifices when someone needs extra support. We argue sometimes, but we always remember that we're on the same team." Same team. Another sports metaphor that seemed to capture essential truths about human social organization. Rather than hierarchical command structures or democratic decision-making processes, families operated on principles of mutual support and shared objectives that somehow coordinated individual behavior without external enforcement. As if to demonstrate these principles, Marcus spoke up. "Mom, I need help with my science project. It's due tomorrow and I'm totally stuck." Linda's expression shifted to concern and mild frustration. "Marcus, we talked about planning ahead for assignments. Why are you just telling us now?" "I know, I messed up," Marcus admitted. "I was going to work on it earlier, but then Jake needed help moving, and I promised I'd be there." "You helped your friend instead of doing your homework?" David asked. "That's going to create problems for you." "I know," Marcus said again. "But Jake's family doesn't have much money, and they couldn't afford professional movers. He really needed the help." Zaraka observed the complex emotional dynamics playing out between the family members. Marcus had violated planning protocols and created potential academic consequences for himself. Yet he had done so in order to assist someone outside the family unit, which seemed to be valued behavior despite its inconvenience. "All right," Linda said after a brief pause. "What kind of help do you need?" "I'm supposed to design an experiment that demonstrates a scientific principle," Marcus explained. "But I can't think of anything that isn't totally boring or impossible to actually do." "What about demonstrating the energy fields Zara's been measuring?" Sarah suggested. "You could set up different social situations and record the changes in group dynamics." The proposal was methodologically sound and would provide valuable additional data for Zaraka's research. More importantly, it demonstrated how the family unit adapted to challenges through collective problem-solving rather than individual punishment or external intervention. "Would you be willing to assist with such a project?" David asked her. "It could be educational for all of us." The request represented another example of humans including outsiders in their cooperative activities. Despite knowing her for only a few days, they were offering to involve her in their family's academic endeavors as if she were already part of their social network. "I would find such collaboration valuable for my research," she replied. "Though I should warn you that my measurement techniques might reveal aspects of your interactions you do not expect to observe." "Even better," Marcus said with enthusiasm that seemed disproportionate to the potential academic benefits. "Let's discover something nobody knew before." For the next several hours, they designed and conducted experiments that measured energy field variations under different social conditions. Marcus proved to be surprisingly sophisticated in his understanding of scientific methodology, while Sarah contributed insights about human behavior that enhanced the experimental design. David and Linda provided practical support and asked questions that pushed the research in productive directions. What emerged from their collaborative investigation was evidence that human family units operated as sophisticated biological and social technologies. The emotional bonds between members created measurable field effects that enhanced individual performance, reduced stress responses, and improved problem-solving capabilities. When family members worked together toward shared objectives, their combined output exceeded the sum of their individual contributions by significant margins. More remarkably, these effects seem to strengthen over time through repeated positive interactions. Unlike Keplerian social structures that required constant maintenance through formal protocols, human families appeared to be self-improving systems that became more efficient and effective through use. "This is incredible," Marcus said, reviewing their data recordings. "We're basically proving that love is a real force that makes people work better together." Love. The word appeared again, and, this time Zaraka was beginning to understand its functional significance in human social systems. Rather than just emotional attachment, love seemed to be a comprehensive technology for creating cooperative relationships that enhanced both individual and group capabilities. "But, why doesn't everyone know about this?" Sarah asked. "If families and communities work better than individual effort, why do some people try to be completely independent?" "Perhaps because the benefits are not immediately obvious without measurement tools," Zaraka suggested. "And, because your educational systems focus on individual achievement rather than collaborative capabilities." "That's kind of sad," Linda observed. "Some of the most important things in life can't be measured by traditional methods." The comment struck at the heart of Zaraka's academic crisis. Her entire civilization was organized around principles of logical optimization and measurable efficiency. Yet the humans had developed social technologies that produced superior results through mechanisms that defied rational analysis. The implications for galactic civilization were staggering. As the evening progressed, she observed how the family's collaborative energy influenced their individual behaviors. Marcus became more focused and creative when working with others. Sarah's natural leadership abilities emerged more strongly in supportive environments. David and Linda displayed parenting capabilities that seemed to enhance rather than constrain their children's development. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sarah said as they were concluding their experiments. "Where you come from, do you have families like this?" The question touched on aspects of Keplerian society that Zaraka had never questioned before arriving on Earth. "We have reproductive partnerships for producing offspring and educational institutions for developing capabilities," she said carefully. "But not permanent emotional bonds between individuals." "That sounds lonely," Marcus said with genuine sympathy. Lonely. Another human concept that didn't translate well into Keplerian frameworks, but which seemed to describe the absence of the energy fields she had been measuring. Looking back on her life experiences through the lens of human social technology, Zaraka realized that she had indeed been isolated in ways she had never recognized. "Perhaps it is," she admitted. "Though I did not understand what I was missing until I observed your family's functioning." "You don't have to be missing it anymore," Linda said gently. "You're welcome here anytime. Family isn't just about biology, it's about caring for each other." The offer of inclusion in their family structure was both touching and terrifying. Accepting would mean abandoning the objective stance required for scientific research. But refusing might mean losing access to the most important discovery of her academic career. "I appreciate your offer," Zaraka said carefully. "Though I am uncertain about the implications for my research objectives." "Maybe that's the point," David suggested. "Sometimes you can't understand something from the outside. Sometimes you have to experience it directly to grasp how it really works." The suggestion violated every principle of scientific methodology she had been taught. Researchers were supposed to maintain objective distance from their subjects to avoid compromising their observations. Yet everything she had learned about human social technology suggested that it could only be understood through participation rather than analysis. As she prepared to return to her temporary lodging that evening, Marcus approached her with a small wrapped package. "I made this for you," he said, offering the gift with obvious nervousness. "It's not much, but I thought you might like it." Inside the wrapping was a small carved figure that appeared to represent her own physical form, crafted with obvious care and attention to detail despite its primitive construction methods. The energy signature of the object showed residual patterns from Marcus's emotional investment in its creation. "Why did you make this for me?" she asked, genuinely puzzled by the resource expenditure involved. "Because you helped me with my project, and because you're becoming part of our family," Marcus replied as if the explanation were obvious. That's what you do for people you care about. Care. Another variation on the love concept that seemed to drive so much human behavior. Zaraka held the small figure carefully, noting how its presence seemed to generate positive emotional responses despite its lack of practical function. "Thank you," she said, meaning it more than she had expected. "I will treasure this gift." As she walked back through the quiet streets of the human settlement, Zaraka realized that her research project had transformed into something far more complex than academic observation. She was no longer studying human social technology from the outside, she was beginning to experience it directly through her own participation in their community structures. The data she had collected provided overwhelming evidence that human social systems produced effects that surpassed anything her own civilization had achieved. But the implications went beyond scientific discovery. If she could successfully decode the principles underlying human social technology, she might be able to revolutionize not just galactic understanding of civilization, but the actual quality of life for billions of beings throughout the galaxy. The question was whether she was brave enough to abandon her scientific objectivity and embrace the kind of participatory learning that seemed to be the key to human social innovation. The answer would determine not only her academic future, but her personal understanding of what it meant to live as a conscious being in a universe full of other minds seeking connection and meaning. The message from the Galactic Research Institute arrived during what humans called morning, though Zaraka had stopped thinking in terms of optimal productivity cycles since beginning her participatory research with the Portland community. Director Velkatha's transmission contained the kind of bureaucratic efficiency that had once seemed natural but now felt cold and disconnected. Research Agent Zaraka. Your preliminary reports indicate significant deviation from approved research protocols. You are hereby ordered to conclude your field study and return to Kepler Prime for debriefing within 7 standard cycles. Failure to comply will result in disciplinary action and possible termination of your academic credentials. Zaraka stared at the communication device, processing implications that extended far beyond her personal career. 7 cycles would barely give her time to pack her equipment and arrange transport, let alone complete the groundbreaking research she had stumbled into. Worse, the directive came just as she was beginning to understand principles that could transform galactic civilization. She was scheduled to meet Sarah's extended family for something called a birthday celebration later that day. The event would provide crucial data about how human social technologies scaled from nuclear family units to larger kinship networks. More importantly, she was beginning to suspect that her emotional investment in these relationships was not compromising her research but actually enabling discoveries that purely objective analysis would have missed. The human dwelling where the celebration was taking place belonged to Sarah's grandparents, David's parents, who had lived in the same location for over 60 Earth years. Zaraka arrived to find 3 generations of humans engaged in elaborate preparation rituals that seemed to require far more resources than the practical objectives warranted. Zara called Marcus from across the space. "Come see what Grandpa built for the party." The elderly human male, whom she had been instructed to address as Grandpa Joe, had constructed an elaborate food preparation station in their outdoor space. The structure served no function that couldn't have been accomplished more efficiently with standard equipment, yet the energy readings around it showed patterns of pride, accomplishment, and anticipation that elevated everyone's mood. 40 years I've been perfecting this barbecue setup," Grandpa Joe explained with obvious satisfaction. "Each modification teaches me something new about heat distribution and flavor development." "It is a remarkable engineering achievement," Zaraka said honestly. "Though I confess I do not understand why you continue to optimize a process that already meets nutritional requirements adequately." Grandpa Joe studied her with the same thoughtful expression she had seen on other humans when her questions revealed the gaps in her cultural understanding. "Come here, let me show you something." He led her to a wall inside the dwelling that was covered with what humans called photographs, 2-dimensional representations of past events that served as external memory storage. But, unlike the efficient digital archives of her own culture, these images seemed chosen for emotional rather than informational content. "This picture was taken at my first attempt at barbecuing, 53 years ago," he said, pointing to an image that showed a much younger version of himself standing beside a blackened, smoking disaster. "Nearly burned down the garage and made food that was inedible even by college student standards." He moved to another image showing a slightly more successful attempt, then another, and another, creating a visual timeline of gradual improvement over decades. Each failure taught me something. Each success encouraged me to try again. But the real reward wasn't the food getting better, it was the people who came to eat it. The final images showed dozens of humans gathered around various versions of his barbecue setup, spanning multiple decades and including individuals of all ages. The energy patterns in the photographs were still detectable by her instruments, residual echoes of the positive emotions that had been present when the images were captured. You see, the barbecue was never about efficiency, Grandpa Joe continued. It was about creating reasons for people to come together. About giving them something to anticipate and remember. About building traditions that connect us across time and generations. Traditions. Another concept that had puzzled Zaraka throughout her research. Human societies were filled with ritualized behaviors that persisted across generations despite serving no apparent practical function. Yet the energy measurements suggested that these traditions were actually sophisticated technologies for maintaining social cohesion across temporal scales that exceeded individual lifespans. But why not simply arrange regular gatherings without the elaborate preparation, she asked. The social benefits could be achieved more efficiently through direct coordination. Could they? Grandpa Joe asked with a gentle smile. When people know that someone has spent hours preparing something special just for them, doesn't that communicate something that simple invitation can't express? Before Zaraka could formulate a response, Sarah appeared beside them carrying a large rectangular object decorated with colorful organic compounds. Birthday cake delivery, she announced. Grandma spent all morning making sure it was perfect. The cake represented another example of human resource inefficiency that somehow produced disproportionate benefits. Grandma Helen emerged from the food preparation area with expressions of concern and anticipation that seemed far more intense than warranted by the simple act of presenting prepared nutrients. I tried a new recipe this year, she explained to the gathering humans. I hope it turned out all right. The entire extended family gathered around the decorated food item with enthusiasm that registered as genuine excitement on Zaraka's instruments. When the person celebrating their birthday, Sarah's cousin Amanda, cut into the cake and tasted it, her expression of delight triggered positive emotional responses throughout the entire group. It's amazing, Grandma, Amanda said, and the elderly female's stress indicators immediately shifted to satisfaction and pleasure. This is definitely going into the family recipe collection. Family recipe collection. Another tradition that preserved knowledge across generations, but not in the form of efficient information transfer. These recipes carried emotional associations, personal modifications, and memories that connected present actions to past experiences and future possibilities. As the celebration continued, Zaraka observed how the extended family structure created layers of social technology that enhanced individual and group functioning in ways that exceeded simple nuclear family units. Children interacted with adults across multiple generations, accessing diverse perspectives and knowledge bases. Adults shared responsibilities and resources in flexible networks that adapted to changing circumstances. Elderly members contributed wisdom and stability while receiving care and respect that maintained their sense of purpose and belonging. Zara, you look thoughtful, observed Sarah's Aunt Patricia. Are you gathering data for your research? I am observing social technologies that my academic training did not prepare me to recognize, Zaraka replied. Your family structure achieves results that surpass theoretical optimal designs through mechanisms I am only beginning to understand. Social technologies, repeated Amanda's husband Tom with interest. That's an interesting way to describe it. Makes me think about how we're all participating in systems that evolved over thousands of years. Evolved, Zaraka said, seizing on the term. Yes, that may be the key distinction. Your social structures develop through experiential refinement rather than theoretical design. Like Grandpa's barbecue techniques, Marcus suggested. Trial and error over long periods, with each generation building on what came before. The parallel was more profound than the young human realized. Keplerian civilization had designed their social structures through careful analysis and logical optimization, then implemented them as fixed systems. Human civilization had evolved their social technologies through continuous experimentation, adaptation, and improvement across countless generations. But surely your approach creates inefficiencies and inconsistencies, Zaraka protested. Without central coordination, How do you maintain optimal resource allocation and conflict resolution? We don't, said Grandma Helen simply. We accept that there will be problems and mistakes, and we focus on maintaining relationships that help us work through difficulties together. Maintaining relationships. Not solving problems permanently, but creating resilient connections that could adapt to new challenges as they arose. It was a fundamentally different approach to social organization that prioritized flexibility and mutual support over theoretical efficiency. As the afternoon progressed into evening, the celebration evolved into the kind of spontaneous community gathering that Zaraka had observed at the block party. Neighbors began arriving, drawn by the sounds and energy of the family celebration. Rather than viewing this as an intrusion, the family welcomed the additional participants and expanded their activities to include everyone who showed interest. Mike appeared with his guitar, leading to an impromptu musical performance that involved multiple generations and skill levels. Mrs. Rodriguez brought additional food that complemented the family's preparations. Children from throughout the neighborhood joined the games and activities that had emerged organically from the celebration. The energy readings from this spontaneous expansion of the gathering showed patterns that exceeded anything Zaraka had previously recorded. Rather than diluting the family's internal connections, the inclusion of community members seemed to amplify and strengthen the positive effects for everyone involved. This is remarkable, she said to Sarah as they watched 3-year-old children playing alongside teenagers and elderly adults in a coordinated activity that no one had formally organized. Your social technologies scale seamlessly from individual relationships to community-wide cooperation. Maybe because they're based on the same principles, Sarah suggested. Care about each other, include rather than exclude, share what you have, help when you can. Whether it's 2 people or 200, the basics don't change. The insight struck Zaraka like a physical force. Human social technology wasn't a collection of separate systems for different group sizes. It was a unified approach based on fundamental principles that could be applied at any scale. The same mechanisms that created stable family bonds also generated community cohesion and could theoretically extend to planetary or even galactic civilization. As she watched the celebration continue around her, Zaraka realized that her academic crisis had deepened beyond career considerations. She had discovered social technologies that could revolutionize galactic civilization, but implementing them would require abandoning the logical optimization principles that formed the foundation of advanced society. Her communication device signaled another message from the Research Institute. This time it was a direct order from Director Velkoff himself, using administrative codes that carried legal enforcement implications. Agent Zaraka. Intelligence reports indicate you have revealed classified measurement technologies to primitive subjects without authorization. Return immediately for investigation of potential security violations. Transport has been dispatched to your location. The message created multiple levels of crisis simultaneously. Her use of bioscanner technology during the family experiments had apparently been detected by Institute monitoring systems. Revealing advanced technology to pre-contact civilizations violated multiple interstellar treaties and could result in criminal prosecution. But, more importantly, forced extraction would prevent her from completing research that could transform the understanding of civilization itself. Bad news? Sarah asked, noticing her distress. Zaraka looked around at the celebration continuing around them, at the humans who had welcomed her as family, at the evidence of social technologies that surpassed anything her advanced civilization had achieved. The choice before her was stark: comply with orders and return to a logical but emotionally sterile existence, or risk everything to protect discoveries that could benefit billions of beings throughout the galaxy. My supervisors have ordered me to return home immediately, she said. They believe my research has compromised security protocols. Do you have to go? Marcus asked with obvious concern. I mean, you're part of our family now. We don't want you to leave. Part of their family. The offer of permanent inclusion in their social network represented everything she had been studying and everything she would have to abandon if she returned to Keplerian society. But accepting would mean severing all connections to her original life and potentially facing criminal charges as a defector. It is complicated, she said, struggling to find words for the emotional turmoil that her instruments could measure, but her training had never taught her to process. Most important decisions are, said Grandpa Joe, appearing beside them with the wisdom that came from decades of experience with difficult choices. But sometimes you have to decide what matters more, following rules or doing what's right. The question would determine not only her personal future, but, potentially, the future development of galactic civilization. As she watched the humans around her creating spontaneous joy and connection through social technologies they didn't even recognize as advanced innovations, Zaraka realized that some discoveries were too important to abandon for the sake of bureaucratic compliance. The transport from Kepler Prime would arrive within hours. She had that long to decide whether to return to the safety of logical optimization or risk everything to protect the most important research of her career. The answer would reshape not only her understanding of civilization, but her understanding of what it meant to be a conscious being choosing to connect with others rather than simply exist in isolation. The Keplerian transport vessel descended through Earth's atmosphere with the precise efficiency that characterized all advanced galactic technology. Zaraka tracked its approach from the roof of Sarah's family dwelling, her instruments detecting the familiar energy signatures of home while her emotional responses registered patterns she couldn't have imagined weeks earlier. 3 months had passed since the birthday celebration that transformed her research from academic observation into personal revolution. 3 months of participating in human social technologies, of experiencing connection and belonging, of discovering that the primitive species she had come to study possessed innovations that could reshape galactic civilization. The humans gathered around her on the rooftop represented the extended family network she had somehow become part of despite every principle of scientific objectivity. Sarah stood beside her with the kind of quiet support that required no words. Marcus clutched the improved bioscanner he had helped her develop, his teenage enthusiasm undimmed by the gravity of the situation. Mike had brought his guitar, as if music could somehow resolve interstellar diplomatic crises. Mrs. Rodriguez carried a container of food, because humans believed that sharing meals could address any problem. "You don't have to go with them," David said quietly. "We've talked to immigration lawyers. There are legal ways to claim asylum if you're facing persecution for your research." Asylum. Political refuge based on the principle that individuals had rights that superseded governmental authority. The concept didn't exist in Keplerian law, which prioritized collective efficiency over individual autonomy. Yet another example of how human social technologies had evolved solutions to problems her civilization hadn't recognized as problems. "The implications extend beyond my personal situation," Zaraka replied, watching the transport's landing lights grow brighter as it approached the designated coordinates. "If I refuse to return, the Institute will classify my research as contaminated and suppress all findings. The discoveries we've made together will be lost." "Not necessarily," Sarah said, producing a data storage device from her jacket. "We've been documenting everything. All the energy readings, the social experiments, the theoretical frameworks we developed together. It's all here." Zaraka stared at the device, processing implications that shifted her understanding of the situation. "You preserved the research data? We figured you might need backup copies," Marcus explained. "Plus, we want to keep studying this stuff ourselves. You've taught us how to measure things we always felt but never understood scientifically." The humans had independently recognized the value of their collaborative research and taken steps to preserve it regardless of political consequences. They were protecting knowledge not for personal benefit, but because they understood its potential to benefit others. Another example of how their social technologies automatically generated behaviors that advanced collective welfare. The transport settled onto the designated landing area with barely detectable vibration, its hull plates already beginning the atmospheric adaptation sequence that would allow Keplerian crew members to survive on Earth's surface. Zaraka's bioscanner registered the familiar presence patterns of her own species, triggering emotional responses she hadn't experienced since childhood. Director Velkoff emerged from the transport accompanied by 2 enforcement officers and a containment specialist whose presence indicated that her situation was even more serious than she had realized. His 4 eyes focused on her with the kind of analytical intensity that had once seemed natural but now felt cold and disconnected. "Research Agent Zaraka," he said, using the formal tones required for official communications. "You are ordered to return for immediate debriefing regarding unauthorized technology transfer and potential violation of pre-contact protocols." Director Velkoff, she replied, maintaining professional courtesy while noting how different Keplerian social interaction felt after months of human warmth and spontaneity. I request permission to complete my research documentation before departure. Your research has been classified as contaminated due to excessive subject interaction, the director stated. All findings will be reviewed and, likely suppressed to prevent diplomatic complications with the Galactic Council. Suppressed. The most important discoveries of her career, innovations that could revolutionize understanding of civilization itself, would be buried in classified archives to avoid political inconvenience. The waste of knowledge and potential for improvement struck her as precisely the kind of inefficiency that human social technologies were designed to prevent. The research contains evidence of social technologies that exceed current galactic capabilities, she said, activating her bioscanner to display the energy field measurements she had recorded from the human gathering around her. Suppressing this information would represent a significant loss for all galactic civilizations. Director Velkoff examined the readings with obvious scientific interest despite his administrative obligations. The patterns of cooperative energy generation and collective enhancement clearly exceeded anything in existing theoretical frameworks. For a moment, his expression showed the curiosity that had originally drawn him to research before bureaucratic responsibilities had constrained his scientific pursuits. Interesting measurements, he admitted. But irrelevant to your immediate compliance obligations. These subjects must be isolated and debriefed to determine the extent of security compromise. The threat to her human family triggered emotional responses that Zaraka's training had never prepared her to handle. These beings had welcomed her, taught her, included her in their social networks without expecting anything in return. The idea of subjecting them to Keplerian interrogation procedures was unacceptable. They pose no security risk, she said firmly. Their social technologies are based on cooperation and inclusion, not exploitation or aggression. Studying them could benefit galactic civilization immeasurably. That determination is not yours to make, the director replied. You will return with us now, and these subjects will be processed according to contact protocol requirements. The enforcement officers began moving toward the humans, their posture indicating preparation for potential resistance. Sarah stepped protectively closer to Marcus, while Mike positioned himself between the officers and Mrs. Rodriguez. The energy readings around the human group shifted to defensive coordination without any verbal communication or formal planning. Zaraka realized that she was witnessing human social technology in action under stress conditions. Rather than scattering or submitting to superior force, they were automatically forming protective formations based on mutual care and shared objectives. Their response demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative social adaptation that made them valuable subjects for continued study. Director, she said, making a decision that would reshape her entire existence. I formally request transfer to extended field research status with authorization to establish a permanent observation post on Earth. The request was technically within research protocols, though it represented a career path that no Keplerian had ever chosen voluntarily. Extended field research meant abandoning the logical optimization of advanced civilization in favor of long-term immersion in primitive conditions. It was considered professional suicide. Request denied, the director said immediately. Your objectivity has been compromised beyond acceptable parameters. You will return for psychological evaluation and possible reassignment to theoretical research positions. Theoretical research. Abstract analysis of data collected by others, without direct contact with living subjects or real-world applications. It was the kind of sterile academic work that produced publications but never generated genuine discoveries. Everything she had learned about human social technology suggested that meaningful innovation required experiential participation rather than distant observation. Then, I formally resigned from the Galactic Research Institute, Zaraka said, surprising everyone including herself with the steadiness of her voice. And, I request political asylum from these humans based on philosophical differences with Keplerian governmental policies. The silence that followed her declaration seemed to extend across the entire city. Director Valkatha's expression shifted through configurations that indicated shock, disapproval, and something that might have been admiration. The enforcement officers looked uncertain about how to proceed with a situation that didn't match their training scenarios. Agent Zaraka, the director said finally. You are proposing to abandon advanced galactic civilization in favor of existence among primitives. The decision is irrational beyond acceptable parameters. The decision is logical within frameworks these humans have taught me to recognize, she replied. They have developed social technologies that produce better outcomes for individual and collective welfare than our theoretical optimizations achieve. Studying them requires participatory engagement rather than distant analysis. Sarah stepped forward, her posture indicating the kind of protective courage that humans displayed when defending family members. She's not abandoning civilization, she said to the director. She's helping both our civilizations learn from each other. That's not primitive, that's evolution. Evolution. The word captured the fundamental difference between Keplerian and human approaches to social development. Her species had optimized their civilization to a fixed configuration and, then, maintained it through rigid protocols. Humans had created adaptive systems that continuously improved through experiential learning and innovation. These subjects have influenced your cognitive patterns, the director observed. You are no longer thinking with Keplerian logic. I am thinking with human wisdom integrated with Keplerian analysis, Zaraka corrected. The combination produces insights that neither approach achieves independently. Marcus stepped forward with his characteristic teenage boldness, holding up the bioscanner that now displayed readings from both human and Keplerian subjects. Look at the energy patterns, he said to the director. When Zara works with us, her readings show the same cooperative enhancement we all experience. She's not becoming less intelligent, she's becoming more connected. The display showed unmistakable evidence that Zaraka's participation in human social networks had enhanced rather than diminished her cognitive capabilities. Her brain activity patterns showed improvements in creative problem-solving, emotional regulation, and collaborative reasoning that exceeded her baseline measurements from Keplerian society. Director Velkoff studied the data with obvious fascination despite his administrative obligations. If these measurements are accurate, he said slowly, they suggest that social integration enhances rather than compromises intellectual function. That's what we've been trying to tell you, Mike said with the kind of gentle humor that humans use to defuse tense situations. Connection doesn't make you weaker, it makes you stronger. That's why we build communities instead of just surviving as individuals. The insight struck the director with visible force. Keplerian society prioritized individual optimization within predetermined roles, assuming that collective efficiency emerged naturally from personal excellence. Human society prioritized relationship building that enhanced individual capabilities through mutual support and shared resources. This research requires further investigation, the director said finally. Agent Zaraka, I am authorizing extended field study with full academic support. You will establish a permanent research station on Earth with responsibility for documenting human social technologies and their potential applications to galactic civilization. The authorization represented everything Zaraka had hoped for but hadn't dared to expect. She would be able to continue her research with official support while maintaining her connections to the human community that had become her family. But, more importantly, the discoveries they made together would be preserved and, potentially implemented across galactic civilization. Thank you, Director, she said, meaning it more than any formal courtesy she had ever expressed. Do not thank me yet, he replied with what might have been the beginning of a smile. I am assigning additional researchers to assist your work. Dr. Linvor will arrive next month to study human educational technologies, and Dr. Kasnel is interested in their conflict resolution mechanisms. Additional Keplerian researchers studying human social innovations. The implications were staggering. Rather than suppressing her discoveries, the Institute was preparing to expand research into human civilization with the goal of implementing beneficial innovations throughout galactic society. We'd be happy to help, Sarah said immediately. The more people who understand how cooperation works, the better things get for everyone. As the transport prepared for departure, leaving Zaraka on Earth with official authorization to continue the most important research of her career, she realized that her personal journey had catalyzed changes that extended far beyond individual transformation. The primitive humans she had come to study were about to become teachers for the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Standing on the rooftop surrounded by her adopted human family, watching Keplerian technology disappear into the star-filled sky, Zaraka understood that she had witnessed the beginning of a revolution. Not a violent overthrow of existing systems, but an evolutionary transformation based on ancient human wisdom about connection, cooperation, and care. The bioscanner in her hands registered the energy fields generated by the humans around her, patterns of mutual support and shared joy that would soon be studied by researchers throughout the galaxy. What they would discover was that the most advanced technologies were not machines or algorithms, but the simple human practices of caring for each other and building communities where everyone could flourish. In the distance, the lights of Portland spread out like a constellation of human connections, each one representing relationships and communities that somehow produced effects greater than the sum of their individual parts. Tomorrow, Zaraka would begin documenting those technologies for civilizations that had forgotten how to generate such magic. But, tonight, she simply stood with her family, measuring the unmeasurable and learning that the most important discoveries came not from studying life from the outside, but from choosing to participate fully in the beautiful complexity of beings caring for each other across the vast loneliness of space.